118 degrees in Death Valley, 117 in the Coachella Valley, and neither of those is the number the National Weather Service is most worried about this week. In Las Vegas, forecasters wrote a separate line into an extreme heat warning about the overnight low and attached the word record to it. Tucson published a minimum temperature range inside a heat warning. San Diego quantified how far above normal the nights would run 3 separate times in one morning. Because the thing that ends a heat wave is not a cold front, it is the night. And from the Mississippi to the Pacific, the night has stopped working, while the ridge doing it keeps spreading. And by the forecast's own numbers, the worst of it has not arrived yet. If that has your attention, hit like and subscribe to the Skylab, because we are tracking this pattern every day as it builds. And drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what your overnight low has been. I want to see how far this reaches. Now let's get into it. Part 1. The records are in the wrong column. There is a sentence buried in a National Weather Service product issued at 1:44 in the morning, Pacific time, out of the Las Vegas forecast office. It reads, "Near record warm low temperatures expected in urban areas." Read that again, because it is the whole story and almost nobody noticed it. This is an extreme heat warning. Extreme heat warnings exist to tell you how hot the afternoon is going to be. That is what they are for. That is the number that goes on the graphic, the number the anchor reads, the number that ends up in the headline. And in this one, the forecaster in Las Vegas took the trouble to write a separate line about the overnight low and attach the word record to it. Not the high, the low. That is not a stylistic choice. That is a forecaster telling you, in the only language an operational product allows, that the dangerous number this week is not the one you're going to see on the bank thermometer at 4 in the afternoon. It is the one you will never look at, recorded in the dark, somewhere around 5 in the morning, when the temperature is supposed to have come down, and this week it will not. So let me show you the rest of the forecast, because once you know what to look for, it is everywhere. At 2:54 in the morning Eastern Time on Sunday, August 23rd, the Weather Prediction Center in College Park, Maryland issued its short-range forecast discussion. The product identifier is Foxtrot X-ray Uniform Sierra 01. The forecast assigned it UDIT, and it is valid from 12 Zulu on Sunday through 12 Zulu on Tuesday. The headline, and I'm quoting it exactly as written, "Dangerous and record-breaking heat continues across the south-central US into the southwest." 24 minutes later, at 3:18 in the morning, the same office issued a second product. This one is the extended forecast discussion, signed by a different forecaster named Schichtel, and it covers a completely different window. From 12 Zulu on Wednesday, August 26th, through 12 Zulu on Sunday, August 30th. Its headline reads, "Hazardous heat to continue from the lower Mississippi Valley, across the southern plains to the desert southwest." Now do the arithmetic on those two windows, because I do not think most coverage did. The first product runs through Tuesday. The second one picks up on Wednesday and runs to the 30th. Stitch them together, and you're looking at 8 consecutive days of forecast written by 2 different people in 2 separate products, 24 minutes apart, and there is no break anywhere in either of them. Not a front, not a relief day, not a cooler weekend at the end. 8 days, and the second product's opening word is continue. That is unusual on its own, but it is not the part that should worry you. Here is the part that should worry you. Inside that extended discussion, in the section where the forecaster describes the actual hazards, there is a sentence that reads, "Record-breaking warm overnight temperatures across the southern tier will further limit recovery from the heat, especially given heatwave longevity which may continue to heat-related illnesses." I want to take that apart clause by clause, because every piece of it is doing work. Record-breaking warm overnight temperatures. That is the same inversion the Las Vegas office made. The records the Weather Prediction Center expects to fall this week are in significant part minimum temperature records, not afternoon highs, nighttime lows across the southern tier. That is the geography, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, the Four Corners, the desert southwest. A band of the country running from the lower Mississippi to the California border will further limit recovery from the heat. There is the mechanism, stated in 5 words. Recovery. The forecaster is describing something that is supposed to happen and is not going to. And then the phrase that I've been thinking about since I read it, especially given heatwave longevity. Longevity. Duration, how long it lasts. Forecast products do not talk like that. A National Weather Service discussion will tell you how strong something is and when it arrives and where it goes. It will give you magnitudes and timing and geography, because those are the things a forecast model produces. Duration is a hazard variable in its own right. The idea that the fifth day of a heat wave is more dangerous than the first day at the same temperature, purely because it is the fifth day, is a public health concept, not a meteorological one. And here it is, written into an operational forecast discussion by a forecaster who evidently decided it was the most important thing to say. The short-range product, the earlier one, says the same thing in different words. With the combination of little to no overnight recovery and high humidity, heat indices may reach 105 to 115 degrees, which may lead to widespread major to extreme heat risk. And then, on the records, these abnormal temperatures are expected to break dozens of high/low daily temperatures through the week. I should stop for a second on that phrase, major to extreme heat risk, because it is going to come up again and again, and it is not the same thing as a temperature. Heat risk is a 5-level scale, running from 0 to 4, that the National Weather Service uses to describe how dangerous a given day's heat is for the people who actually have to live through it. Level 0 is little to no risk. Level 1, minor, affects people who are unusually sensitive to heat. Level 2, moderate, starts to reach people without effective cooling and anyone doing heavy outdoor work. Level 3 is major, and that is where the language changes. Significant risk to anyone without adequate cooling or hydration, with impacts likely in heat-sensitive industries and infrastructure. Level 4 is extreme, rare, long-duration heat with little or no overnight relief, affecting anyone without effective cooling, and the level at which health systems start seeing the population scale effects. The reason that scale exists is that a raw temperature is a terrible predictor of harm. 105 degrees in Phoenix in June, at the end of a cool spell, in a city where essentially every building is air-conditioned, is a different event from 105 degrees in a place that has not been below 80 in a week. Heat risk is built to capture the difference. It folds in how unusual the temperature is for that location and time of year, how long the heat has been going on, and whether the nights are providing relief. Read the Level 4 definition again and notice what is in it. Long duration, little or no overnight relief. Those are not consequences of extreme heat risk, they are part of the definition of it. The scale was designed by people who already knew that duration and failed nights are what turn heat into a mass casualty event, and it is that category the Weather Prediction Center is forecasting to go widespread this week. Dozens, not one or two, dozens of daily records, high and low, over a single week. And notice how the forecaster wrote it, high/low. Both columns. In a normal heat wave, you break the high temperature records and the low temperature records stay where they are, because the nights still work. In this one, both columns are in play. Now, one office writing an odd sentence is a quirk. Two products from the same office is a house style, so let me give you the other offices because they are not coordinating their wording and they are all doing the same thing. The Tucson Forecast Office issued an extreme heat warning at 2:10 in the morning, Mountain Standard Time, running all the way through 8 in the evening on Saturday, August 29th. It covers the Tucson metro area, Green Valley, Marana, Vale, South Central Pinal County, the Upper Gila River Valley, the Tono O'odham Nation including Sells, and western Pima County out to Arjo and Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. Here is how the hazard is described. Dangerously hot conditions with high temperatures ranging between 103 to 111 degrees and low temperatures 79 to 85 degrees. Low temperatures 79 to 85 degrees, in a heat warning, with a stated range, as if it were a forecast parameter that mattered on its own. I've read a lot of these products. Offices do not normally put a minimum temperature range in the what section of an extreme heat warning. The what section is for the thing that hurts you. Tucson put the overnight low in the what section. Then there is San Diego. The San Diego office issued its products at 17 minutes past 5 in the morning, Pacific time, and it quantified the overnight anomaly 3 separate times, in 3 separate alerts for 3 separate zones. For the Coachella Valley, the San Diego County deserts, and the San Gorgonio Pass near Banning, overnight temperatures 5 to 8 degrees above normal will limit relief from the heat. For the Apple and Lucerne valleys, low temperatures 5 to 10 degrees above normal will limit relief from the heat. And for the San Diego and Orange County coastal areas, Overnight lows around 5 to 7 degrees above normal will limit relief from the heat. 3 products, 3 different geographies, the same sentence structure, 3 times with the number changed. That is a forecast office that has decided the overnight anomaly is the message. So here is where we are, before we have gone anywhere near a temperature map. The Weather Prediction Center has written an 8-day forecast with no exit in it. It has named duration as a hazard. It expects record-breaking warm overnight temperatures. Las Vegas is watching its lows. Tucson is publishing a minimum range inside a heat warning. San Diego has quantified the overnight anomaly 3 times in one morning. Every one of them is telling you the same thing, and it is not the thing the title of a heatwave story usually promises. The ceiling is not the story. The floor is. Let me give you one number for scale before we go further, because I think the size of this thing is being undersold. As of the data pool behind this video, there were 228 active National Weather Service alerts across the United States. Every kind. Marine advisories, flood warnings, beach hazards, air quality, everything. Of those 228, 48 are heat products, 14 extreme heat warnings, 8 extreme heat watches, and 26 heat advisories. That is about 21% of every active alert in the country. But that number is deceptive in the direction of making it look smaller than it is, because 107 of those 228 alerts are small craft advisories, routine marine products, most of them in Alaskan waters, that are close to a permanent background feature of the system. Take those out and you are left with 121 alerts covering land and coastline. 48 of them are heat. Roughly 40% of every meaningful weather alert in the United States on the 23rd of August is about heat. And the forecast for the rest of the week has already been written. 2 forecasters, 2 products, 24 minutes apart covering 8 days. Neither of them contains a way out. The obvious question is why? Why will it not move? What is holding it there? To answer that, we have to start with a single number that one forecast office in California published at 3 o'clock in the morning, a number that describes the thing sitting over New Mexico right now and explains everything that happens in the afternoon. It does not on its own explain the nights. That takes a second ingredient, but we have to get the afternoons right first. Part 2, 597. At 1 minute past 3 in the morning, Pacific Daylight Time, the National Weather Service office in Los Angeles and Oxnard published its area forecast discussion. The synopsis section opens with a sentence that is almost aggressive in its plainness. The theme of the short and long term will be heat, and then the forecaster gives you the object. A 597 decameter upper high centered over New Mexico will sit in place through Tuesday. 597 decameters. If you have never encountered that number before, it is the single most useful thing in this entire forecast, and it is worth 2 minutes of your time to understand properly, because once you have it, you can read any heat wave in the world. Here is what it means. Atmospheric pressure falls as you go up. At sea level, it is around 1,013 millibars. Somewhere around 18,000 feet, roughly halfway up through the mass of the atmosphere, it has dropped to 500 millibars, half a bar, half the atmosphere below you and half above. Meteorologists care enormously about that surface, and they map it constantly. But they do not map the pressure, they map the height. They ask, at what altitude does the pressure hit 500 millibars today? And that altitude moves around, because warm air expands and cold air contracts. Over a cold air mass, the column is compressed and you reach 500 millibars lower down. Over a warm air mass, the column is puffed up and you have to climb higher to get there. So the 500 millibar height field is a map of how warm the whole column of air is, expressed as an altitude. A trough is a place where that surface sags. A ridge is a place where it bulges upward. And the number attached to it is the bulge, measured in decameters, tens of meters. 597 decameters is 5,970 meters. Call it just under 19,500 feet. For a late August ridge over the American Southwest, that is a serious number. That is a column of air warmed through its whole depth, sitting over New Mexico, and the Los Angeles forecaster says it will sit in place through Tuesday. Then comes the part that matters more. Heights, the forecaster writes, will be near 592 decameters today and Monday, but will rise to 594 on Tuesday. The ridge is not decaying. Over California, it is intensifying. Sunday and Monday at 592, Tuesday at 594. 2 decameters does not sound like much. In practice, over a region already running 5 to 10 degrees above normal. It is the difference between very hot and something else. So what does a ridge actually do to make it hot? 3 things, and they stack. The first is subsidence. Under the centre of a ridge, air sinks. It does not sink dramatically. We are talking centimetres per second, but it sinks continuously, day and night, for as long as the ridge is there. And sinking air compresses because the pressure around it is rising as it descends. Compression warms a gas. For dry air, the rate is close to 10 degrees Celsius for every kilometre of descent, which is a startlingly large number when you first meet it. Air that starts a kilometre higher up and comes down arrives 10 degrees Celsius, warmer than it left, without any energy being added to it at all. The warming is purely mechanical. The second is cloud suppression. Sinking air is warming, and warming air moves further from saturation, not closer. So under a ridge, clouds cannot form. The sky clears out and it stays clear, and the full solar load reaches the ground every single day with nothing in the way. In late August at 33 degrees north, that is a lot of energy arriving on a surface with no shade over it. The third is the evaporation budget, and this one is the least intuitive and probably the most important. When solar energy arrives at a surface, it gets divided. Some of it goes into raising the temperature of the ground and the air above it. Some of it goes into evaporating water, from soil, from vegetation, from anything wet. Evaporation is enormously energy hungry. It takes about 2.25 million joules to evaporate a single kilogram of water, and every one of those joules is a joule that did not go into making anything hotter. That is why a damp field feels different from a parking lot on the same afternoon. It is not just the colour, it is that the field is spending the sun's energy on evaporation, and the parking lot has nothing to spend it on except temperature. Now put a ridge over a region for weeks. The subsidence dries the column. The clear skies dry the ground. The evaporation budget collapses because there is nothing left to evaporate, and every joule that used to go into water now goes into temperature. That is the afternoon, mechanically, from the top down. And you do not have to take the Heightfield's word for it, because a completely different office measured a completely different variable and got the same answer. The Houston and Galveston Forecast Office wrote its discussion just before midnight on Saturday. The oppressive heat wave continues across the region, it says, as a strong mid to upper level ridge over the southern Rockies and West Texas stays in place through at least Wednesday. Subsidence aloft, along with warm and humid south to southwest surface winds, will keep conditions hot and sticky. And then the number. Forecast models remain consistent in placing 850 millibar temperatures in the 22 to 26 degrees Celsius range today through midweek. 850 millibars is roughly 5,000 feet up, and it is the cleanest number in meteorology for a question that comes up constantly in conversations about heat. Is it really hot, or is the thermometer in a bad place? At 5,000 feet, you're above the surface boundary layer, you're above the pavement, you're above the parking lot, above the air conditioner exhaust, above the airport tarmac and the building that got built next to the weather station in 1994. There is nothing up there but air, and that air, over the Texas Gulf Coast, is sitting at 22 to 26 degrees Celsius. Call it 72 to 79 Fahrenheit, 5,000 feet above the ground, which is extremely warm for that altitude. The air mass itself is hot, not the measurement, the air. And the phrase the forecaster attached to it is the one that closes the door on any hope this is a model error. Forecast models remain consistent. Not the models suggest, not one solution shows, consistent, meaning they have been saying the same thing, run after run, and they are still saying it. The Houston forecaster then translates that air mass number into what it means at eye level. Surface highs reaching the upper 90s to low 100s. Triple digits inland, mid-90s along the coast through Wednesday and Thursday. A heat advisory in effect and, in the forecaster's words, likely to need extending through at least Wednesday. And then, in a moment of unusual candour for a technical product, this. For those looking for relief from the heat, options remain limited. That is a forecaster telling you there is nowhere to go. Zoom back out to the continental scale and the Weather Prediction Center's extended discussion describes the whole structure. Guidance maintains an amplified and well-clustered larger-scale upper pattern highlighted by a strong southwest US high anchored, and mean troughs near the Pacific Northwest and the east-central US through this period. And then the sentence that makes this a story rather than a forecast. This pattern will not change very much this week, and as such will continue to support a protracted heat wave. Two phrases in there are doing the heavy lifting. Anchored. Not moving, not progressing, not shifting east the way weather systems are supposed to. Anchored and well clustered. That is a technical term about model agreement. When forecasters run an ensemble, dozens of slightly different versions of the same model, each started from slightly different initial conditions, they look at how the solutions scatter. Widely scattered means low confidence. Nobody knows. Well clustered means the solutions are piling up on top of each other, all telling the same story. The Weather Prediction Center is saying that everything it has agrees. This is not a forecast anybody is hedging on. The models are not fighting. The ridge is where it is. It is strong. It is getting slightly stronger over California by Tuesday, and it is not going anywhere before the 30th. That explains the afternoons completely. 597 decameters over New Mexico, subsidence, clear skies, a dry column, and an air mass that is genuinely hot 5,000 feet up. But it does not explain the nights. Not by itself. A strong ridge in a dry desert will still let go of its heat after sunset. That is the whole reason the desert is famous for cold nights. Something else has to be happening for Las Vegas to be watching its record lows and for Tucson to put 79 to 85 degrees in a warning. And the answer is already sitting in the alert set, in a single word that appears in exactly one of the 14 extreme heat warnings and in none of the others. Part 3. The warning set. Office by office. Picture a dozen rooms, spread across 4 time zones, staffed overnight by people who have never met each other. In Las Vegas, it's 1:45 in the morning. In Phoenix, it's 12 minutes past midnight. In Tucson, 10 past 2. In San Diego and Los Angeles, 5 in the morning and midnight respectively. In Fort Worth, Amarillo, Lubbock, Austin and Norman, various points either side of 11 the previous evening. Each of those offices has its own forecast area, its own local models, its own house style, and its own set of thresholds calibrated to what its own population can tolerate. They do not write these products together, and on the night of August 22nd going into the 23rd, all of them independently sat down and wrote about the same object. The result is 14 extreme heat warnings, 8 extreme heat watches, and 26 heat advisories, and I want to walk you through them, because reading the whole set at once tells you something that no single one of them says. Start with San Diego, issued at 17 minutes past 5 in the morning, and running until 8 in the evening on Friday, August 28th. The warning covers the Coachella Valley, the San Diego County deserts, and the San Gorgonio Pass near Banning, and the hazard reads, dangerously hot conditions with temperatures up to 117. Then, in the additional details field, the line we have already met, overnight temperatures 5 to 8 degrees above normal, will limit relief from the heat. Move east to Las Vegas, issued 1:44 in the morning, Death Valley National Park and the lower Colorado River Valley at 115 to 118 degrees, Lake Mead on both the Arizona and Nevada sides, Lake Mojave, Lake Havasu, Fort Mojave, the Northwest Deserts, the upper Colorado River Valley portion of San Bernardino County, and the Las Vegas Valley itself at 107 to 110. And then, again, near record warm low temperatures expected in urban areas. Then Phoenix, which issued 3 separate extreme heat warnings at 12 minutes past midnight, all of them running through 8 in the evening on Saturday, August 29th. The first covers the Phoenix metropolitan area, the Northwest Valley, Buckeye and Avondale, Deer Valley, Central Phoenix, North Phoenix and Glendale, Scottsdale and Paradise Valley, the East Valley, South Mountain and Ahwatukee, and the Southeast Valley out to Queen Creek. Afternoon temperatures 108 to 116, major to extreme heat risk. The second covers the Aguila Valley, the Tonopah Desert, Gila Bend, Cave Creek and New River Mesa, Rio Verde and the Salt River, Fountain Hills and East Mesa, Superior, Northwest and West Pinal County, Apache Junction and Gold Canyon, and the Sonoran Desert National Monument, 105 to 116. The third covers San Carlos alone, 104 to 113, and then there is a fourth Phoenix product, and it contains one word that none of the other 13 extreme heat warnings in this country contain tonight. It covers Parker Valley, Kofa, Yuma, Central La Paz County, Southeast Yuma County, the Gila River Valley, Imperial County Southwest, Southeast and West, the Imperial Valley, and the Palo Verde Valley. Afternoon temperatures 106 to 118, and the description begins, dangerously hot and humid conditions. Humid. Every other warning in the set says dangerously hot conditions. This one says dangerously hot and humid conditions, and that single adjective is the monsoon, and the monsoon is why this heat wave is behaving the way it is. Hold that thought, because we come back to it in about 6 minutes, and it is the answer to the entire question about the nights. Keep going east. Tucson, 10 past 2 in the morning, running through the 29th, 103 to 111, lows 79 to 85, and a hazard forecast that steps upward. Major heat risk expected through Tuesday, and then widespread major to extreme heat risk Wednesday through Saturday. Read that structure again, because it is the shape of this whole event. The forecast does not peak today and decay. It holds today, and then gets worse midweek. Now Texas, where 4 separate offices wrote 4 separate warnings covering between them most of the populated part of the state. Fort Worth, issued at 11:34 on Saturday night, running noon to 9 on Sunday evening. High temperatures up to 109, and it is the geography that gets your attention. Montague, Cook, Grayson, Fannin, Young, Jack, Wise, Denton, Collin, Hunt, Delta, Hopkins, Stevens, Palo Pinto, Parker, Tarrant, Dallas, Rockwall, Kaufman, Van Zant, Rains, Erith, Hood, Somerville, Johnson, and in a second product Lamar, Eastland, Henderson, Comanche, Mills, Hamilton, Freestone, Anderson, Lampasas, Coriel, Bell, Falls, Limestone, Leon, Milam, and Robertson. That is Dallas and Fort Worth and everything around them, out to the Red River in one direction and past Waco in the other. Lubbock, 5:32 in the morning. Briscoe, Hall, Childress, Motley, and Cottle counties, the far southeastern Texas Panhandle, and the northern Rolling Plains, with temperatures up to 113. Amarillo, 11:26 the previous night. Donnelly and Collingsworth counties, and a separate product just for Palo Duro Canyon State Park, both at temperatures up to 110. Austin and San Antonio, 11:06 the previous night. Llano, Burnett, Williamson, Travis, Bastrop, Lee, Caldwell, Fayette. Gonzales and Lavaca counties. Temperatures up to 107, with heat index values up to 110 on Sunday afternoon, and then a forecast that keeps going. Temperatures up to 105 Monday through Wednesday. And across the border in Oklahoma, the Norman office at 11:02, heat index values up to 113 across southeast, southern, southwestern, western Oklahoma and northern Texas, covering Beckham, Washita, Harmon, Greer, Kiowa, Jackson, Tillman, Comanche, Stevens, Cole, Cotton, Jefferson, Carter, Johnston, Atoka, Love, Marshall and Bryan counties, plus Hardeman, Ford, Wilbarger, Wichita, Knox and Baylor across the line in Texas. The Tulsa office, in its hazardous weather outlook, listed dangerous heat at elevated risk for eastern Oklahoma and west central Arkansas, with heat index values climbing into the 105 to 110 degree range in the afternoon. Now, the Fort Worth office also published a set of key messages, and I want to read all 3, because the third one belongs to a completely different story, and we're going to spend a whole section on it later. 1. Hot temperatures near or over 100 degrees will continue through next week, with the hottest days of the summer likely today through Tuesday. 2. An extreme heat warning is in effect for all of north and central Texas today. Additional extensions of heat headlines are expected through the middle of the week. 3. Hot temperatures and low humidity will contribute to increased wildfire starts this week. Remember that third one. So that is the warnings. What is happening now? But the watches are the more interesting half of the set, because a watch is a forecast office telling you what it thinks is coming, and every single extreme heat watch in the country tonight runs from Tuesday morning through Friday evening. San Diego's watch set, the Inland Empire, San Bernardino and Riverside County valleys at 100 to 107, the San Diego County Inland valleys at 90 to 102, Inland Orange County at 90 to 98, the mountains at 89 to 100, Apple and Lucerne valleys up to 108 with limited nighttime cooling, and the forecaster's own summary line, temperatures increase slightly for the middle and end of next week, making for a prolonged and dangerous stretch of heat. Prolonged. There it is again, from a third independent source. Los Angeles and Oxnard's watch set is larger. The Santa Clarita Valley, both ranges of the Santa Ynez Mountains, the Santa Barbara County Interior Mountains, Lake Casitas, the Ojai Valley and the Central Ventura County Valleys, heat advisory up to 107 through Tuesday morning, then an extreme heat watch with temperatures up to 112 possible. The Antelope Valley and both sets of its foothills up to 112, the Cuyama Valley up to 104, and then the coastal zones, Catalina and Santa Barbara Islands, the Santa Barbara County southwestern and southeastern coasts, the Ventura County beaches and inland coast, the Malibu coast, the Palos Verdes Hills, the Los Angeles County beaches, and the Los Angeles County inland coast, which is to say, downtown Los Angeles. Dangerously hot conditions with temperatures up to 100 possible. Which brings us to the number in this entire set that I find most revealing, and it is not 118, it is 93. San Diego issued an extreme heat watch for the San Diego County coastal areas and the Orange County coast with the hazard stated as dangerously hot conditions with temperatures up to 93 possible. 93 degrees, in a product with the word extreme in its name. If you live in Phoenix, 93 degrees is a pleasant morning. If you live in Yuma, 93 degrees is the temperature at which you consider going outside, and the San Diego Forecast Office has attached an extreme heat product to it, and the office is completely correct to have done so. Because dangerous is not a temperature. Dangerous is a relationship between a temperature and a population. Coastal Southern California has housing stock built for a marine climate. It has one of the lowest air conditioning penetration rates of any major metropolitan area in the country, because for a century it did not need it. And it has a population that is physiologically acclimatized to a narrow band of temperature, which is not a metaphor. Acclimatization to heat is a measurable physiological adaptation involving plasma volume, sweat rate, and sweat sodium concentration, and it takes 1 to 2 weeks of exposure to develop. 93 degrees in a coastal city that has not seen 93 in months, in buildings with no air conditioning, for a population with no acclimatization, is a genuinely dangerous day. And notice what the San Diego forecaster added to that 93-degree watch. Overnight lows around 5 to 7 degrees above normal will limit relief from the heat. There it is a third time. So read the whole set now, all 48 products, and ask what they have in common. It is not the high temperature. Those range from 93 to 118, a spread of 25 degrees. It is not the geography, which runs from the Pacific to the Mississippi. It is not the duration, which varies office by office. It is the sentence about the night, appearing over and over, written independently by offices that were not talking to each other, because every one of them was looking at the same forecast soundings and seeing the same thing. Which raises the question we have been circling for 20 minutes. The offices keep telling you the nights are the problem. Nobody has yet explained why the night is the thing that matters. Part 4. What the night is actually for. Here is a claim that sounds wrong the first time you hear it. The thing that ends a heat wave is not a cold front. The thing that ends a heat wave is the night, and it does it every 24 hours, and it has been doing it quietly your entire life without you noticing. Let me build that up properly, because everything after this depends on it. Start with what actually happens after sunset on a normal night. The sun goes down and the ground stops receiving shortwave radiation, but the ground does not stop emitting. Everything with a temperature radiates energy, and the ground, at say 35 degrees Celsius after a hot afternoon, radiates in the infrared, continuously upward. On a clear, dry night, a large fraction of that radiation goes straight out through the atmosphere and into space, and it is gone. The ground cools. As the ground cools, it starts cooling the layer of air immediately above it, and something structurally important happens. The boundary layer decouples. During the day, the surface is being heated from below, and the air is turbulent, churning, mixing, connecting the ground to the atmosphere a kilometre up. At night, with the surface cooling, that turbulence shuts down. A shallow, stable layer forms near the ground, and it is no longer being fed heat from above. It is free to keep cooling on its own. That is the mechanism. Long-wave radiation to space, plus decoupling, and the surface temperature falls. It is the most reliable process in meteorology. It happens every night, everywhere, and the number it produces is the daily minimum temperature. Now let me tell you what that number is actually for, because it is doing far more work than anyone gives it credit for. Start with a human body. Thermoregulation is expensive. When you are hot, your body dilates peripheral blood vessels to move heat to the skin, which drops your blood pressure, which forces your heart rate up to compensate. You sweat, which costs you water and electrolytes. Your kidneys work harder to manage the fluid balance. Sustained over hours, that is real cardiovascular and renal strain. And in a person who already has cardiovascular or renal disease, it is the strain that kills. The overnight minimum is when that stops. Core temperature falls during sleep. It does this anyway, on a circadian rhythm, and a cool night lets it happen. The cardiovascular load drops. The fluid balance gets a chance to recover. The heat debt accumulated during the day gets paid off. That is the reset. And heat injury is cumulative, which means the reset is not a comfort. It is the limiting factor on accumulation. Now do the same exercise for the machinery. An air conditioner does not run continuously on a normal hot day. It cycles, on for a while, off for a while, and the fraction of time it spends running is the duty cycle. As the outdoor temperature rises, the duty cycle rises with it, and at some point the unit is running 100% of the time and can no longer maintain the indoor set point. Overnight, as the outdoor temperature falls, the duty cycle falls back and the unit gets a break. That break is what keeps residential air conditioning from failing during a heat wave, and it is also, at the system level, what pulls the grid off its afternoon peak. Electrical infrastructure has the same story. Transformers and transmission conductors heat up when they carry load, and their ratings are not really about instantaneous current. They are about accumulated thermal stress over time. Overnight, with demand down and ambient temperature down, they shed heat. That nightly cooling is baked into how the equipment is rated and how long it is expected to last. Hospitals have the same story, expressed as admissions. Heat-related emergency department visits do not track the daily maximum nearly as well as they track the minimum, and that finding shows up repeatedly in the epidemiological literature. So there is your list: bodies, air conditioners, transformers, hospitals. 4 completely different systems, and every single one of them is built around the assumption that the temperature comes down for 8 hours and everything resets. Now let me show you the 3 things that are switching that off this week, in order of importance. The first is water vapor, and it is the reason that one Phoenix product said humid. Water vapor is a long-wave absorber. When the ground radiates infrared energy upward on a dry night, most of it escapes to space. When the ground radiates infrared energy upward on a humid night, a large fraction is absorbed by water vapor in the lower atmosphere and re-radiated in all directions, including back down. The energy does not leave, it gets handed back. This is why the desert is famous for cold nights, and it is also why the desert stops being famous for cold nights every July and August. The North American monsoon pushes moisture up from the Gulf of California and the Eastern Pacific into Arizona, and the moment that moisture arrives, the diurnal range collapses. A dry Sonoran night in May might drop 30 degrees Fahrenheit from the afternoon high. A monsoon night in August might drop 12. That is exactly what the Phoenix office is describing when it writes dangerously hot and humid for the Yuma and Imperial Valley zones, and it is why the operative number down there is the heat index rather than the air temperature. Humidity does 2 things at once, and both of them are bad. It stops the night from radiating, and it stops your sweat from evaporating. The second is thermal mass, and this is the one the phrase heatwave longevity is actually about. Every object with a temperature also has a heat capacity, an amount of energy it can absorb per degree of warming. Asphalt, concrete, brick, the structural mass of a building, and the top meter or so of soil all store enormous quantities of heat during a hot day, and they release it slowly through the night. On a normal hot day, followed by a normal night, the storage and the release roughly balance, and the system returns to where it started. But if the night is too short or too warm or too humid to radiate efficiently, the release is incomplete. Some of the stored heat is still there at sunrise, and then the next day loads more heat on top of it. Do that for 2 days and you barely notice. Do it for 5, and the starting temperature every morning is measurably higher than the morning before, the afternoon peak arrives earlier, and the amount of energy that has to be shed every night keeps growing, while the night's ability to shed it stays the same or gets worse. That is a compounding deficit. It is an accounting problem more than a weather problem, and it is why a heatwave's fifth day is more dangerous than its first day at the same temperature. It is also, word for word, what the Weather Prediction Center meant by heatwave longevity. The third is the ridge itself, and it is the simplest of the three. Subsidence does not switch off at sunset. That column of sinking, compressing, warming air over New Mexico is doing exactly the same thing at 3 in the morning that it was doing at 3 in the afternoon. It keeps a layer of warm air pressed down over the surface all night, and that warm layer puts a floor under how far the surface temperature can drop, no matter how efficiently the ground radiates. Put the three together: moisture blocking the radiation, thermal mass carrying yesterday's heat into today, and the ridge holding a lid on the whole thing, and you get exactly what every forecast office in the Southwest independently wrote down last night. Now, we have talked about a mechanism failing before on this channel, and it is worth connecting the two because they are the same shape. In the video from August 18th, about Miami approaching a temperature threshold it has reached exactly once in more than a century of records, the story was not that something new was being added. The story was that three protective mechanisms that had always held that city's temperature down, the sea breeze circulation, the humidity's suppression of the raw air temperature, and the reliable afternoon convection that shuts the heating off, all went offline on the same day. The record was not going to creep up as a forcing grew. It was going to jump when the brakes failed. This is the same shape at a larger scale. What is failing here is not a local sea breeze in one metropolitan area. It is the night across a band of the country running from the Mississippi to the Pacific for 8 consecutive days. And that scaling up matters because of a pattern in the historical record that public health researchers have been pointing at for 30 years. Essentially, every mass casualty heat event in the American record has been a duration event rather than a magnitude event. Chicago in 1995 was not the hottest temperature ever recorded in Illinois. The Pacific Northwest event in 2021 was extraordinary partly for its peak, but far more for the fact that it hit a population with almost no air conditioning and gave them consecutive nights with no recovery. Phoenix's worst summers are described by the length of their streaks, not by their single highest reading. The temperature is the hazard. The duration is what turns the hazard into a body count. And the studied worst case, the one that emergency planners lose sleep over, is heat plus a power failure, because that is the scenario where the last remaining reset, the artificial one, is removed from the last people who still had one. It is not a hypothetical. It is a modelled scenario with published casualty estimates for specific American cities, and the number is in the thousands, so bring it back to the alerts. When the San Diego office wrote the overnight anomaly 3 separate times in one morning, it was not padding the product. When Tucson put 79 to 85 in the what section of a warning, it was not being thorough. When Las Vegas wrote near record warm low temperatures expected in urban areas, that was not a footnote. Those offices were telling you the reset is gone, which leaves the question that the whole first third of this video has been building toward, and it is not a comfortable one. If the night is what ends a heat wave, and the night has been switched off for 8 days across a third of the country, then what actually stops this? Does anything in the pattern have the ability to stop it at all? And the honest answer, from the forecast itself, is that the peak has not even arrived yet. Part 5. The escalation is scheduled for Wednesday. Everything I have shown you so far describes today. Today is not the peak. I want to make that as concrete as possible, because it is the claim in the title of this video, and it deserves evidence rather than atmosphere. So here are 4 separate forecast offices, independently, telling you that the worst part of this is still in front of it. The Tucson office, in the extreme heat warning it issued at 10 past 2 in the morning, major heat risk is expected through Tuesday, and then widespread major to extreme heat risk Wednesday through Saturday. Go back to the heat risk scale for a second. Major is level 3, significant risk to anyone without adequate cooling or hydration, impacts likely in heat-sensitive industries and infrastructure. Extreme is level 4, rare, long-duration heat with little to no overnight relief, affecting anyone without effective cooling. Tucson is forecasting the transition from 3 to 4 and putting a date on it, Wednesday. The Los Angeles and Oxnard office in its discussion. Heights will be near 592 decameters today and Monday, but will rise to 594 decameters on Tuesday. And then the consequence. The increase in heights and decrease in the afternoon's onshore flow will bring 2 to 4 degrees of warming to almost all areas on Tuesday. Triple-digit heat will affect all areas away from the coasts. The Fort Worth office, highs on Monday will likely be 2 to 4 degrees warmer compared to today. And, in the key messages, additional extensions of heat headlines are expected through the middle of the week. The Houston office, a heat advisory remains in effect today and is now in effect through Monday evening. Given the persistent warmth and humidity, the advisory will likely need to be extended through at least Wednesday. 4 offices, 4 separate forecast areas. All 4 say the same thing. What you're feeling today gets worse in the middle of the week. And then look at the expiry dates on the products that already exist, because a National Weather Service office does not write a warning that runs for a week, unless it is very confident. Phoenix, through 8 in the evening Saturday the 29th. Tucson, through 8 in the evening Saturday the 29th. San Diego, through 8 in the evening Friday the 28th. The Los Angeles watches, Tuesday morning through Friday evening. That is a dozen offices independently taking a week-long posture. It is the strongest available signal that the people whose job it is to watch this thing believe it is locked in place. And it is not only intensifying, it is spreading, and I can show you the direction. Go all the way up to Seattle, which is about as far from a heat dome story as the lower 48 gets. The Seattle Forecast Office wrote its discussion at 14 minutes past 3 in the morning, and the first half of it is about an upper-level trough moving through with showers and isolated thunderstorms in the Cascades. Cool, unsettled, unremarkable late August Pacific Northwest weather. Then comes the second half. Upper-level ridging will build into the Pacific Northwest on Monday, with the ridge axis shifting eastward over the Intermountain West by Tuesday. This will bring a warming and drying trend to western Washington the first part of the week, with Tuesday expected to be the warmest day. Afternoon high temperatures will climb into the 80s, across the interior lowlands and into the low 90s across the Cascade Valleys by Tuesday, reintroducing moderate heat risk to portions of these areas. So the same structure that is producing 118 degrees in Death Valley is, over the next 48 hours, going to put 90-plus degree temperatures into Cascade Valleys that were seeing showers and thunderstorms this morning. That is a ridge expanding northward across roughly 1,000 miles of latitude in 2 days. And Seattle adds one more consequence, which is going to matter enormously in about 10 minutes. Surface flow will also transition to northerly and then offshore at times, which may allow for some smoke transport from ongoing wildfires across British Columbia and eastern Washington to make its way back into western Washington. The ridge is not just bringing heat to the Pacific Northwest, it is changing the wind direction over a region that is on fire. Now I want to show you something that I think is the single most honest sentence any government agency has published this week. It is in the long-term section of the Los Angeles Oxnard discussion, and it reads, "The only real question for the Wednesday through Friday forecast is, will it be very hot or extremely hot?" That is a forecaster, in a public product, telling you that the forecast has collapsed to a 2-option menu, and both options are bad. And then, unusually, the forecaster explains exactly where the disagreement lives. This forecast problem, they write, is driven by a wide range of possibilities with the surface gradients. The European model is showing a fairly strong offshore push, which would bring near-record very dangerous heat to the area. The GFS keeps the east-west gradient weaker. Let me unpack what an offshore push does to Southern California, because if you do not live there, this is not obvious. Normally the flow is onshore. Air moves from the cool Pacific inland, and it drags the marine layer with it. That shallow deck of cool, moist air that gives coastal California its famous grey mornings. That marine air is the single biggest thing keeping coastal and near-coastal temperatures down in summer. It is a permanent air conditioner running off the ocean. An offshore push reverses it. High pressure inland and lower pressure at the coast drives the air the other way, from the interior, over the mountains and down toward the sea. And air moving downslope does exactly what air moving down under a ridge does. It compresses, and compression warms it. So the offshore push does 2 things at once. It kills the marine layer, removing the cooling. And it delivers air that has been mechanically heated on the way down. That is why the European model solution produces what the forecaster calls near-record very dangerous heat, and the GFS's weaker gradient does not. 2 of the world's leading operational models, looking at the same atmosphere, disagreeing about a surface pressure gradient, and the disagreement is worth 10 or 15 degrees on the coast. The same office then attaches a probability to a decision it has not made yet, At this time, it is very likely 80% confidence that the watches will be converted into extreme heat warnings. 80% published in advance. That is a testable claim with a resolution date this week, which is a thing forecasters do far more often than they get credit for. But here is the part I want you to hold on to about that model disagreement, because it is easy to hear two models disagree and think uncertainty means maybe it will be fine. There is no cool solution in the envelope. The European model produces near-record dangerous heat. The GFS produces very hot. Neither of them produces relief. The uncertainty in this forecast is not about whether this week is dangerous. It is entirely about how far past dangerous Wednesday through Friday goes. That is a spread with a floor and no ceiling, and the floor is already in warning territory. Now, this channel has been tracking this exact dome for a month, and I want to close a loop. In the video from July 25th, we framed the summer's ridge not as a record story, but as a duration experiment. The question being not how high it goes, but what happens if it simply does not break. And we named two specific things to check in August, because a prediction you cannot check is not worth making. The first was the severe drought footprint. At that point, the United States Drought Monitor had the country stuck on a plateau right around 29.14% of the lower 48 in severe drought or worse, and the question was whether it would move. The second was what we called the August test. The Weather Prediction Center's extended discussions had been forecasting the heat to hold. Would the extension verify, or would the pattern break? Both of those have now resolved, and they resolved the same direction. The severe drought footprint in the release for the week of August 18th stands at 29.87%, up from the plateau and up again by 0.37 percentage points in the last week alone. And the August test did not just verify. The extended discussion issued yesterday morning forecasts hazardous heat from the lower Mississippi Valley across the southern plains to the desert southwest, through August 30th, under a pattern the forecaster describes as one that will not change very much this week. The duration experiment has now been running for over a month, and the answer so far is that it does not break. Now I want to give you the counter-signal, because I would rather tell you the number that complicates the story than have you find it yourself and wonder why I skipped it. The national alert count on July 25th was 431. Today it is 228. That is a much smaller footprint, roughly half. So is this weaker than July? By that one measure, yes. Fewer zones are covered, fewer offices have products out. If you are measuring this heat wave by how much of the map is coloured in, July was the bigger event. But look at what an alert count actually measures. It counts zones with an active product. It is a measure of area, and it is sensitive to how offices happen to draw their polygons. It contains no information whatsoever about how long the pattern has been in place, how much heat has accumulated in the ground since July, or whether the nights are recovering. Duration is precisely the variable the Weather Prediction Center just named as the compounding hazard. And duration is exactly the thing an alert count cannot see. A smaller footprint on the 40th day of a pattern is not the same as a smaller hazard. It might be a more concentrated one. And there is a second reason the July comparison matters, which has nothing to do with people. The Fort Worth office already told you where this week's heat is going next, and it was not in a temperature forecast. It was in that third key message, the one I asked you to remember. Hot temperatures and low humidity will contribute to increased wildfire starts this week. To understand what that sentence means, you have to look at the state of the ground the heat is arriving on, and the ground has been getting ready for this all summer. Part 6. 3/4 of a country drying. Every Thursday, a group of climatologists working out of the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska publishes a map of the United States with 5 categories on it, and the map for the week of August 18th reads like a descending staircase. 76.21% of the contiguous United States is abnormally dry or worse. 52.70% is in drought. 29.87% is in severe drought or worse. 10.60% is in extreme drought or worse. 1.35% is in exceptional drought, the worst category the scale has. Those categories are nested, which is a detail that trips people up constantly. So let me do the subtraction and give you numbers that describe actual separate territory. 19.27% of the country is in severe drought, but not extreme. 9.25% is in extreme drought, but not exceptional. and 1.35% is in the category the Drought Monitor reserves for exceptional and widespread crop and pasture losses and shortages of water in reservoirs, streams and wells, creating water emergencies. More than 3/4 of the lower 48 is at least abnormally dry. More than half is in drought. Nearly a third is in severe drought or worse. It is worth knowing what those categories actually mean on the ground, because the labels sound like adjectives and they are not. They are operational definitions with observable consequences attached. Abnormally dry, the D0 category, is not officially drought at all. It is the going in or coming out state, short-term dryness slowing planting or growth, or lingering water deficits after a drought has otherwise ended. Moderate drought, D1, is where damage to crops and pastures begins, stream flow starts running low, and some water shortages develop. Severe drought, D2, the 29.87% line, is defined by likely crop or pasture losses, common water shortages, and water restrictions being imposed. That is the level at which a drought stops being an agricultural statistic and starts showing up in municipal policy. Extreme drought, D3, brings major crop and pasture losses and widespread water shortages or restrictions. An exceptional drought, D4, the 1.35%, is reserved for exceptional and widespread crop and pasture losses and shortages of water in reservoirs, streams and wells, creating water emergencies. So when I tell you that nearly a third of the contiguous United States is at D2, or worse, the translation is that nearly a third of the country is at or beyond the point where water restrictions are a normal response. The weekly change was plus 0.37 percentage points on that severe drought line. That is small. It is also the wrong direction in the last week of August, and it puts the severe drought footprint a third of a percentage point away from 30%. Now here is the timing point, and it is the one that changes how you should read every number I just gave you. That map measures the week ending August 18th. This heat wave started after it. The map does not contain this event. What you're looking at is not the damage from the heat. It is the condition of the ground the heat arrived on. It is the starting line. So what does the drought state actually do to fire behaviour? The answer runs on two completely different clocks, and you need both. The fast clock is fine fuels: grass, pine needles, leaf litter, twigs, anything roughly the thickness of a pencil or less. Those materials exchange moisture with the air around them on a timescale of hours. Meteorologists literally classify them by response time, and the fastest class is called 1-hour fuels, because that is roughly how long it takes them to come into equilibrium with a change in humidity. Under a ridge, with relative humidity in the teens through the afternoon, and temperatures over 100, fine fuels dry down into single-digit moisture content. At that point, a spark that would have gone nowhere on a normal day becomes a fire. Fine fuels are what decide whether an ignition takes at all. The slow clock is heavy fuels: downed logs, stumps, the thick organic duff layer on a forest floor, and the soil moisture underneath all of it. Those respond over weeks to months. A single hot week barely touches them. What touches them is a season, and that is precisely what the Drought Monitor's severe and extreme categories are measuring. Those numbers are a memory of months, not days, and heavy fuels decide something different. They decide whether a fire that starts keeps going, whether it survives the night when humidity recovers, whether it is still burning next week, whether crews can put a line around it, or whether it just holds in the duff and comes back. So the picture is, the heavy fuels were already dried out by the season, and this week's ridge is drying the fine fuels on top of them. Which is exactly what the Fort Worth Forecast Office wrote, and I want to give that sentence its due. Hot temperatures and low humidity will contribute to increased wildfire starts this week. That is a National Weather Service office in Texas, in a routine public product, drawing a direct causal line from this week's heat to this week's ignitions. But there is a distinction in there that keeps the claim honest, and I want to make it explicitly, because it gets flattened constantly. The heat does not start fires. The overwhelming majority of wildfires in the United States are human-started. Equipment sparks, vehicles, power lines, campfires, dragging chains, hot exhaust on dry grass. Those ignition sources exist every day of the year, and most days they produce nothing at all because the fuel will not take. What the heat and the low humidity change is what happens in the 90 seconds after the spark. On a normal day, a spark in grass makes a small black spot. On a day with single-digit fuel moisture, the the same spark makes a fire that is already 50 feet across by the time anybody sees it. The ignition rate does not change nearly as much as the take rate does. The heat does not light the match, it decides what the match does, and you can see the result from orbit. NASA's Fire Information for Resource Management System, FIRMS, takes thermal infrared data from satellites and flags every pixel that looks like an active fire. In the 24 hours behind this data, it logged 1,403 active fire hotspots across the United States. The two hottest detections in the entire set are worth looking at closely. They sit at 44.84 degrees north, 118.25 degrees west, and they are both reported at a fire radiative power of 154.4 megawatts. Fire radiative power is a measure of how much energy the fire is putting out in the moment the satellite looked at it, and 154 megawatts from a single pixel is a genuinely intense heat source. Those coordinates put it in the Blue Mountains of northeastern Oregon, in Baker and Grant County terrain. Now let me flag something about that detection rather than overselling it, because this is exactly where fire reporting goes wrong. Those two detections are 1 pixel apart, and both carry a nominal confidence flag rather than high. 1 pixel apart means this is one hot source appearing in 2 overlapping detections, not 2 separate fires, and nominal confidence means the algorithm is reasonably but not strongly convinced. So the correct reading of that data point is one intense heat source in northeastern Oregon, probably real, worth watching. Not 2 new megafires. And that brings us back to the ridge, because there is a loop here that closes neatly and I want to make sure it is visible. The subsidence that is producing record warm nights in Phoenix is the same subsidence that suppressed the rain over Oregon. The clear skies that are loading the full solar budget onto Texas are the same clear skies that dried the fuels in Washington. The drought map is not a separate story running alongside the heat story. The drought map is the heat dome's receipt, but the fuel state on its own tells you about danger in general. It does not tell you why, on the current national fire list, there are 2 fires that have refused to close for over a month, while the other 8 have all but finished. For that, you have to look at the fires themselves. Part 7, 10 fires, and all of them are July's. The National Interagency Fire Center keeps a list of the large incidents currently burning in the United States. Today, that list has 10 fires on it. Between them, they cover roughly 2,166,000 acres, an area a little larger than Yellowstone National Park. Let me read you the roster, because the pattern in it is not in any single line. Big Grass in Oregon, 578,637 acres, 93% contained, discovered on the 23rd of July. Crosswhite, also Oregon, 342,977 acres, 87% contained, discovered the 16th of July. Coleman Creek, Oregon again, 308,863 acres, 99% contained, discovered the 25th of July. Tartar in Idaho, 158,027 acres, 98% contained, the 24th of July. Sinlahekin in Washington, 154,480 acres, 47% contained, the 26th of July. Little Giant, also Washington, 142,218 acres, 15% contained, discovered the 16th of July. Kaiser Canyon, Washington, 138,284 acres, 98%, also the 16th of July. Widemouth 2 in Utah, 129,741 acres, 93%, the 27th of July. Babylon, Utah, 107,189 acres, 100% contained. Discovered the 26th of June, and Second Flat, Oregon, 105,854 acres, 96%, the 24th of July. Now go back through those discovery dates. June 26th, July 16th, July 16th, July 23rd, July 24th, July 24th, July 25th, July 26th, July 27th. Not one of them started in August. The 10 largest active fires in the United States in the last full week of August are all fires that were ignited between late June and the end of July. The list is not a snapshot of what is burning now. It is a list of what has refused to stop burning since a month ago. If you take the acreage-weighted average containment across those 10, you get about 89%, and that number sounds like a season winding down. It is also close to worthless, and I want to explain why. Because containment is probably the most misunderstood number in disaster reporting. Containment does not measure how much of a fire is out. It measures the fraction of the fire's perimeter that has a completed control line around it. A control line is a physical barrier, a strip scraped down to mineral soil by a dozer or a hand crew, a road, a river, a rock face, an area already burned, that crews believe fire will not cross under expected conditions. 90% containment means 90% of the edge has that. It says nothing about the interior. A fire can be 90% contained and still have hundreds of acres of active flame inside it, burning in heavy fuel for weeks. And it means that a rising containment percentage has two completely different possible causes. One is that crews got line around the fire. The other is that the fire ran out of anywhere to go. It hit a river, a burn scar, a ridge, or the edge of the fuel, and the line closed itself. Both produce the same number on a public dashboard, and the number does not tell you which happened. Now look at the two fires on that list that break the pattern. Sinlahekin, in Washington, is at 47% containment, 28 days after discovery, across 154,000 acres. And Little Giant, also in Washington, is at 15% containment, 38 days after discovery, across 142,000 acres. 15%. Think about what that describes physically. 85% of the perimeter of a fire the size of a small county has no completed line on it, 5.5 weeks after it was found. That is not a fire being managed toward a finish. That is a fire that crews have not been able to get around. 8 of the 10 fires on that list are essentially over. 2 of them are carrying almost all the remaining open line in the country, and those 2 are in northern Washington, directly under the ridge that is about to build north over them this week. Now I want to close a loop that we opened 19 days ago, because this is the whole reason we track these things. In the video from August 4th, about how badly the public metrics were describing that fire season, we asked one very specific question about the Sinlahekin. At that point it stood at 102,934 acres at 5% containment after 9 days. And the question was, would the containment figure move before the acreage did? Here is the answer, 19 days later. The acreage went from 102,934 to 154,480. That is roughly 50% growth, and the containment went from 5% to 47%, so both numbers moved. But look at the order and the ratio. The fire grew by more than 50,000 acres, and the containment percentage climbed 42 points, which means the line that now exists is a line around a fire half again as large as the one we were talking about on the 4th. The containment number improved because the fire finished expanding, not because it was stopped early. That is the lesson, and it generalizes well beyond this one incident. When you see a containment percentage climbing, you're watching a race between 2 variables, and the percentage alone will never tell you which one won. Sometimes crews got ahead of it. Sometimes it simply ran out of forest. Little Giant is the live rerun of exactly that race. 142,000 acres, 15%, 38 days in, and about to spend a week under a strengthening ridge with Cascade Valley temperatures forecast into the low 90s. And here is the connection to everything we established in the first half of this video, which I do not think most fire coverage ever makes. Fires do not get their overnight reset either. The reason a fire lies down at night is the same physics we walked through for a city. After sunset, the surface cools, relative humidity climbs as the air approaches its dew point, and fuel, moisture and fine fuels rises with it. Grass that was at 5% moisture at 4 in the afternoon might be at 15% at 4 in the morning, and 15% grass does not carry fire the way 5% grass does. Night is when crews make progress, because night is when the fire lets them. A warm, dry night with poor humidity recovery removes that. The fire stays active through the small hours. Crews who would normally be building line find themselves holding what they have, and the fire that should have been quiet at 3 in the morning is still running. So the failed nocturnal recovery that is threatening people in Phoenix and Las Vegas is the same failed nocturnal recovery that is keeping a fire line active at 3 in the morning in Okanogan County, Washington. 2 fires with open line, a ridge building north over them, a week of forecast heat, and the ignition source for the next one is already in today's Outlook. Part 8. The Rim of the Ridge. A ridge is not a lid over the whole country. It is a wall, and everything that would otherwise cross the country has to go around it. And the going around is where the violence happens. So while the middle of the ridge is producing dead calm and a sky with nothing in it, the rim of the ridge is producing lightning, wind, flooding, and smoke, all in the same 24 hours. Start with the lightning, because it connects directly to the last section. The Spokane Forecast Office issued a red flag warning at 4:53 in the morning, Pacific time, for the northern and central Idaho Panhandle and the Selkirk Mountains of northeast Washington. Here is what it says, in full. Isolated to scattered thunderstorms into Sunday morning. Gusty outflow wind gusts up to 30 miles per hour. Lightning strikes will have the potential to start new fires, and gusty and erratic outflow winds could cause rapid spread of new and existing fires. And the storm prediction, Center's Day 1 fire weather outlook carries two areas, elevated risk for wind and relative humidity, and a separate category with a slightly awkward name, isolated dry thunderstorm. A dry thunderstorm is exactly what it sounds like, and it is one of the more unpleasant tricks the atmosphere plays. A storm forms and produces rain, but the layer of air beneath the cloud base is so dry and so thick that the rain evaporates completely on the way down. It never reaches the ground. What does reach the ground is the lightning, a channel of plasma at tens of thousands of degrees, delivered into fuel that has been drying for 2 months with no rain following it. And then the second half of the mechanism. As that rain evaporates below the cloud, it cools the air around it. Cold air is dense. It falls. It hits the ground and spreads out horizontally in every direction. That is an outflow, and the Spokane warning puts it at 30 miles per hour, gusty and erratic. So the storm delivers the ignition, and then, minutes later, delivers the wind to push it in a direction nobody can predict because outflow spreads radially rather than following the prevailing flow. 4 fire weather watches are active nationally. The Bismarck office's outlook notes near-critical fire weather conditions possible Monday afternoon, potentially returning to far southwestern North Dakota on Tuesday. That is the rim delivering ignitions to fuel that the center of the ridge dried out. Now the second thing the rim delivers, which is the opposite problem in the same place. The Pueblo, Colorado Forecast Office issued a flash flood watch at 55 minutes past 2 in the morning, and it does not name a river. It names a fire. Flash flooding and debris flows caused by excessive rainfall continue to be possible over the Aspen Acres burn scar. Here is why a burned watershed behaves differently from an unburned one. In a healthy forest, rain lands on a litter layer, needles, leaves, decomposed organic material, that acts like a sponge. Water percolates down slowly, most of it infiltrating into soil that is full of root channels and pore space. Runoff is a small fraction of what falls. A high-severity fire removes that entirely. The litter layer combusts, and in some soils the compounds released as organic material burns condense a short distance below the surface and form a water-repellent layer. Hydrophobic soil, which is exactly what it sounds like. Water lands and cannot get in. So rainfall that a healthy watershed would have absorbed almost entirely now runs off almost entirely, and it does not run off clean. It picks up ash, loose soil, and burned material as it goes, and the result is not a flood, it is a debris flow, a slurry dense enough to move boulders and vehicles, arriving with very little warning in a channel that was dry 10 minutes earlier. The Weather Prediction Center's extended discussion puts 3 things in one sentence. Individual cells may lead to isolated instances of flash flooding for sensitive locations such as burn scars, favoured terrain like slot canyons and urban areas, burn scars, slot canyons, cities. Those look like an odd list until you notice what they have in common. All 3 are surfaces that do not absorb. A slot canyon is bare rock funneling water into a narrow space. A city is impermeable roof and pavement plumbed into storm drains sized for a different climate. A burn scar is soil that has been chemically waterproofed by the fire that crossed it. The ridge's monsoon rim is delivering rain to exactly the ground its own fires prepared. Third, the northern rim, and one of the cleanest before and after numbers I have seen in a while. Yesterday, August 22nd, the Storm Prediction Center logged 331 storm reports across the country, 289 wind reports, 40 hail reports, and 2 landspout tornadoes. The standouts: an 80-mile-per-hour gust on Interstate 80 near Knowles in Tucson County, Utah, 74 miles per hour in Morgan County, Colorado, and hail 1 3/4 inches across, reported in Ohio, Colorado, and West Virginia on the same day. Today, as of the data behind this video, 0 tornado reports, 0 wind reports, 0 hail reports, no active watches anywhere in the country, 331-0, inside 1 diurnal cycle. That is the ridge taking control of the interior in a single day, and it is about as clean a demonstration of subsidence as you will ever get. The energy that produced 289 wind reports on Saturday did not go anywhere. It got capped. The convection did not disappear. It got pushed to the rim. Today's slight risk from the Storm Prediction Center sits over the northern Rockies and High Plains and the northern Great Basin, with 40 to 50 knots of mid-level flow overspreading central and eastern Montana, and the discussion notes that given the very well-mixed boundary layer an enhanced mid-level flow expected, some of these gusts could exceed 75 miles per hour on an isolated basis. 75-mile-per-hour winds over dry country with fires burning 2 states away is not a small footnote. Fourth, and this one matters for a different reason, about half of this country is having a perfectly nice week. There is a flash flood warning in central Chautauqua County, New York, where 3 to 5 inches of rain have already fallen, with another 1.5 to 3 possible. There are river flood warnings on the Illinois River near Havana and at Beardstown, and on the White River from Spencer to Hazleton in Indiana, with crests moving downstream through the week. Chicago is forecast for the mid to upper 70s, with overnight lows near 60. Boston is in the upper 70s. Washington and Baltimore are looking at 70s and mid-80s with dew points below 60 degrees, which in late August in the mid-Atlantic is close to a gift. If you live in any of those places, none of this is happening to you, and that is not a counter-argument. It is the other half of the same wave. The Weather Prediction Center described the pattern as a strong southwest high anchored, with mean troughs near the Pacific Northwest and the east-central United States. The trough over the eastern third of the country and the ridge over the southwest are not 2 weather systems. They are 2 parts of one standing wave in the jet stream, and you cannot have the comfortable half without the dangerous half. The same amplitude that gives Chicago a 60-degree night gives Phoenix a 90-degree one. And fifth, the Pacific, which is where this story stops being about America. The Central Pacific Hurricane Center is running advisories on Tropical Storm Moke a few hundred miles south-southeast of Hawaii, and the Honolulu Forecast Office issued a flood watch at 3:15 in the morning local time, through Monday afternoon, for Kona, Kohala, the Big Island interior, the Summit, the South, the Southeast, the East, and the North. Moisture on the northern periphery of Tropical Storm Moke, it reads, will bring areas of heavy rain to portions of the Big Island. Flash flooding caused by excessive rainfall is possible for windward and southeast Big Island. Tropical Storm Lala is running well north of the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, and NASA's Earth Observatory System is tracking Typhoon Sodell in the West Pacific at 110 knots, 3 tropical systems on one side of the continent. Now hold that next to the Atlantic Tropical Weather Outlook issued at 8 o'clock this morning from Miami, which I am going to read in its entirety because it will not take long. A non-tropical area of low pressure located a few hundred miles west of the coast of Portugal is producing limited shower activity. This system has only a slight chance of acquiring subtropical characteristics. That is the whole thing, on the 23rd of August, 18 days before the climatological peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. So everything I have shown you so far describes what the ridge is doing. Nothing so far explains why it will not move, and the answer is not in the atmosphere at all. It is in the water, and the emptiest tropical forecast of the year is the clue that tells you where to look. Part 9, 29.02 degrees. 29.02 degrees Celsius. That is the average sea surface temperature for the 3 months of May, June and July of 2026 inside one rectangle of the equatorial Pacific Ocean. 84 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly, averaged over a patch of open water about 5,000 miles from the Coachella Valley. I want to convince you that this number, more than any single thing in the atmosphere, is why the ridge over New Mexico is not moving. The rectangle has a name. It is called the Nino 3.4 region, and it runs from 170 degrees west to 120 degrees west, and from 5 degrees north to 5 degrees south. A band straddling the equator in the central Pacific, roughly between Hawaii and the Galapagos. It was not chosen for its scenery. Decades of research established that the sea surface temperature in that specific box has more predictive value for global weather patterns than anywhere else on the planet. The number derived from it is the Oceanic Nino Index. You take the average sea surface temperature in that box, subtract a long-term baseline, and take a 3-month running mean to smooth out the noise. If the result stays at or above plus 0.5 degrees Celsius for 5 consecutive overlapping seasons, that is officially an El Nino. At or below minus 0.5 La Nina. In between, neutral. The current value for May through July of 2026 is plus 1.39. Status, El Nino. Trend, warming. Now let me walk you through how it got there, because the trajectory is more informative than the number. For December, January and February of this year, the index sat at minus 0.39. Cool. Not quite La Nina, but on the cold side of neutral, with a sea surface temperature in that box of 26.15 degrees. January, February, March, minus 0.21. Still cool, warming. February, March, April, plus 0.11. The sign flips. March, April, May, plus 0.46, almost at the El Nino threshold. April, May, June, plus 0.95, well past it, and now in what forecasters would call a moderate event, and May, June, July, plus 1.39. Do the arithmetic on the endpoints. Minus 0.39 to plus 1.39 is a swing of 1.78 degrees Celsius in 6 overlapping 3-month seasons. That is not a small wobble. That is the Central Pacific reorganizing itself over the course of about 8 months. And look at the step sizes, in order, plus 0.18, plus 0.32, plus 0.35, plus 0.49, plus 0.44. The sequence accelerated for 4 steps, and then held near its maximum rate instead of decelerating. There is no sign in that series of an event that is finished developing. There is also a timing problem, and it is worth flagging. El Niño events have a seasonal preference that is one of the most robust facts in climate science. They develop through boreal spring and summer, peak in November, December and January, and decay through the following spring. That is why the phenomenon is named after Christmas. Peruvian fishermen noticed the warm water arriving around the holiday, and El Niño means the boy child, as in the Christ child. This one is at plus 1.39 in the middle of summer. It is already at strong event strength months before an event of this type would normally reach its peak. Now, the mechanism. How does a patch of warm water 5,000 miles away hold a ridge over New Mexico in place for 8 days? The chain has 3 links, and none of them is mysterious. Link 1. Convection follows the warm water. Thunderstorm activity in the tropics is not evenly distributed. It clusters over the warmest sea surface, because that is where evaporation is highest and the air is most unstable. Normally, in the Pacific, the warmest water is in the far west, around Indonesia and the maritime continent, and that is where the deepest tropical convection lives, in a permanent region of towering thunderstorms. An El Niño moves the warm water east. The trade winds slacken. The warm pool that is normally piled up against Asia slides toward the central Pacific, and the convection goes with it. That is the entire event physically. It is a relocation of the planet's largest heat engine by several thousand miles. Link 2. Convection launches waves. When a tropical thunderstorm complex releases latent heat high in the troposphere, it does not just make rain. It perturbs the atmosphere above it, and that perturbation propagates outward and poleward as a Rossby wave, a large-scale meander in the flow, driven by the fact that the Earth is rotating and the Coriolis effect changes with latitude. Those waves are what the jet stream's north-south undulations actually are. Link 3. Move the source, move the wave. The pattern of ridges and troughs in the mid-latitudes is not random. It is, to a significant extent, the downstream response to where the tropical heating is. Shift the heating a few thousand miles east, and the standing wave pattern over North America shifts and reorganizes with it. which is why El Nino winters have a recognizable signature over the United States that forecasters have been using for decades. Now put that next to the exact language the Weather Prediction Center used to describe today's pattern. An amplified and well-clustered larger-scale upper pattern, highlighted by a strong southwest United States high anchored and mean troughs near the Pacific Northwest and the east-central United States. A high in one place, and troughs on either side of it is not a weather system. That is a wave, described in wave language, and the word anchored is doing precisely the work that a tropical forcing would explain. Waves in the atmosphere normally progress eastward. That is why weather moves. A wave that stops progressing is a wave that is being held, and something has to hold it. And when the Weather Prediction Center says the guidance is well clustered, it is telling you that its entire ensemble of models agrees the holding continues. Now let me put the honest limit on this claim, because I do not want to overstate it, and the overstatement is a common one. El Nino does not issue instructions to a specific week. It is a seasonal scale forcing that shifts probabilities. It makes certain patterns more likely and certain patterns less likely over a period of months. It does not decide that August 26th through the 30th will be hot in Texas. Plenty of ridges anchor themselves over the southwest in years with no El Nino at all, and plenty of El Nino summers do not produce this. What can be said with confidence is narrower and still important. There is a strong El Nino in place. It is at an unusually high value for the time of year. The mechanism by which it favours a persistent southwest ridge is well established, and the pattern currently sitting over the country is the pattern that mechanism produces. That is a candidate explanation, not a proof. But it is the best one available, and it points at something the atmosphere alone does not. Because here is what it means for the central question of this video. The reason the night has not recovered for 8 days is that the ridge has not moved for 8 days, and the reason the ridge has not moved may be sitting in a rectangle of the Pacific Ocean with a 3-month average temperature of 29 degrees Celsius. The nights in Phoenix are being decided by water off the coast of Ecuador, and if that is true, if the same ocean anomaly is holding this ridge, then it should be leaving fingerprints somewhere else on the map, somewhere completely different, somewhere with no connection to a heatwave at all. It is, and you already saw it a few minutes ago in the emptiest weather forecast of the year. Part 10. The Ocean That Emptied. The Atlantic. Let me read you the Atlantic Tropical Weather Outlook again, in full, because it is the single most informative document of the day, and it is almost entirely blank. Issued at 8 in the morning Eastern Time, Sunday, August 23rd, by the National Hurricane Center in Miami. For the North Atlantic, Caribbean Sea and the Gulf, northeastern Atlantic, a non-tropical area of low pressure, located a few hundred miles west of the coast of Portugal, is producing limited shower activity. This system has only a slight chance of acquiring subtropical characteristics. That is it. That is the entire Atlantic basin. Now put a calendar next to it. The climatological peak of the Atlantic hurricane season is September 10th. That date is not a guess. It is derived from decades of storm records, and it marks the point where the combination of sea surface temperature, atmospheric instability, and low wind shear is most favourable. Today is August 23rd. We are 18 days out from the busiest day of the Atlantic year, and the busiest ocean basin on Earth right now has one non-tropical low near Portugal that probably will not become anything. Meanwhile, on the same day, in the Pacific, Tropical Storm Moke dumping rain on the Big Island, Tropical Storm Lala north of the Hawaiian island chain, and Typhoon Saudel at 110 knots in the Western Pacific, which is Category 3 strength on the scale most people know. 3 storms on one side, one dubious low on the other. This is not a coincidence, and the mechanism is one of the best established teleconnections in tropical meteorology. A hurricane is a heat engine that has to be built vertically. Warm ocean water evaporates, the moist air rises, the water vapor condenses at altitude and releases latent heat. That heat makes the column more buoyant, more air rushes in at the bottom, and the whole thing spins up around a low-pressure core. For that engine to work, the column has to stay stacked. The circulation at 15,000 feet has to sit more or less directly over the circulation at the surface. Vertical wind shear is the difference in wind between the bottom and the top of that column, and it is a hurricane's most effective killer. Strong shear does 2 things. It tilts the developing vortex so the upper and lower circulations are no longer aligned and cannot reinforce each other, and it ventilates the core, injecting dry environmental air into the storm's middle levels and cutting the latent heat release that powers the whole thing. Now here is the El Nino connection. Warm water in the central and eastern Pacific increases convection there, which strengthens the upper-level westerly flow that spreads eastward across Central America and out over the tropical Atlantic. That flow lands on top of the Atlantic's developing storms as increased shear. The Atlantic does not get less warm, it gets more hostile, and the same forcing does the opposite thing in the Pacific. Warmer water, more favourable shear, and a West Pacific that keeps producing large storms. So the empty Atlantic outlook is not the absence of a signal, it is the same signal, read on a different instrument. The ridge over New Mexico and the blank map in Miami are two outputs from one input. That is the fingerprint I said we should look for. It is right there, and it has been all summer. Now, I want to add one careful thought here, and then a second careful thought about the careful thought, because this is a place where weather coverage regularly overreaches. An El Nino Atlantic season defers rather than deletes. The heat content in the Atlantic does not evaporate because the shear is high, the water is still warm. What is missing is the atmospheric permission to use it, and historically the pattern of a quiet sheared El Nino Atlantic followed by an active season, once the El Nino decays, is a recognizable one. The ocean holds the fuel, the atmosphere eventually stops suppressing it, and the following year is the one that gets your attention. That is a real pattern. It is not a prediction, and I want to be careful not to dress it up as one. Seasonal forecast skill exists, but it is coarse. Nobody can tell you from an index value what any specific week is going to do in any basin, and a channel that pretends otherwise is selling you something. What the empty Atlantic does tell you, right now, today, is that the ocean atmosphere system is in a coherent state, the sort of state where one forcing is producing consistent, recognizable outputs in several places at once. That is why the ridge is anchored rather than progressing. That is why the guidance is well clustered instead of scattered, and that is why an 8-day forecast written at 3 a.m. can say, with a straight face, that the pattern will not change very much this week. And in a place like the Big Island, you can see both sides of the same forcing at once. The Honolulu office's floodwatch is live right now for the entire island. Kona, Kohala, the interior, the summit, the south, the southeast, the east and the north, because moisture on the northern edge of Tropical Storm Moke is bringing heavy rain through Monday afternoon. That is an active Pacific driven by the same warm water that is shutting the Atlantic down and holding a heat dome over the American Southwest. One ocean anomaly. 3 outcomes on 3 parts of the map, all on the same Sunday. So let me put the whole chain together because it now runs end to end and every link is something we have actually looked at. The ocean anchors the wave anchors the ridge closes the sky and dries the column. The dry column loads the full solar budget onto the ground and gives it nothing to spend it on except temperature. The monsoon moisture on the ridge's western flank blocks the ground from radiating that heat back out at night. The heat that does not leave overnight is still there in the morning, and it accumulates day over day for as long as the ridge holds, and the removed night is what turns a hot week into a dangerous one. That is a complete explanation. It runs from a patch of tropical ocean to a hospital admission in Tucson, and every step of it is measured, which is exactly the point at which a reasonable person gets suspicious, an explanation that tidy, arriving with that much confidence, about a pattern that will not move, that is going to draw a very specific set of objections, and some of those objections are better than you might expect. Part 11. The Things It Isn't. A ridge that will not move for 8 days feels designed. I want to start there, because I think the instinct is reasonable, and it usually gets treated as if it were not. Weather is supposed to be the thing that changes. It is the standing metaphor for changeability in every language on Earth, and when something in the sky sits still for a week and a half while the ground under it burns, the suspicion that somebody is doing this on purpose is not a stupid suspicion. It is what a pattern-detecting animal does when the pattern stops behaving. So let us take the objections seriously, in order, and see which ones survive contact with the numbers. Some of them do better than you would think. The first one is that the dome is engineered, that this is weather modification, geoengineering, or a deliberately maintained atmospheric structure. The way to test that is not to sneer at it, it is to price it. Start with the mass of air we're talking about. The ridge covers a substantial fraction of a continent, call it 2 million square kilometers, conservatively, and it extends through the depth of the troposphere. The atmosphere above 1 square meter of surface weighs about 10,000 kilograms. Multiply that out, and you are looking at something on the order of 10 to the 19th kilograms of air. That is roughly 10,000 million tons. Now the energy. The general circulation of the atmosphere runs on something like 2% of the solar energy the Earth intercepts, which puts the total kinetic energy budget of global atmospheric motion in the region of 10 to the 20th joules per day. To maintain a specific standing wave against the atmosphere's natural tendency to progress eastward, you would need to be doing work on a meaningful fraction of that. Call it 10 to the 19th joules per day, and that is generous to the theory. For comparison, total global electricity generation is roughly 10 to the 20th joules per year, so the operation would need to be putting something like a tenth of humanity's entire annual electricity production into the sky every single day, for 8 consecutive days, using infrastructure nobody has seen, generating waste heat nobody has measured, drawing power off grids that are currently setting demand records for entirely mundane reasons. And then there is the question of what technology would even be doing it. Cloud seeding is the only weather modification technique that works at operational scale, and it is worth knowing exactly what it does, because the gap between the reality and the reputation is enormous. You introduce silver iodide or a similar material into a cloud that already exists, and it provides nuclei for ice crystals to form on. In favourable conditions, that can improve the precipitation efficiency of that cloud by something in the range of 5 to 15%. It cannot create a cloud, it cannot move a cloud, and it has no mechanism whatsoever for creating or relocating a 597 decameter height field over New Mexico. The technology in the theory does not exist. The energy the theory requires is not available. And crucially, the pattern the theory tries to explain has a perfectly good conventional explanation that we spent the last 2 sections walking through. The second objection is that the death tolls are inflated. This one deserves a real answer rather than a dismissal, because heat mortality genuinely is hard to count, and the difficulty is not made up. Here is the actual problem. Heat almost never appears as the proximate cause on a death certificate. Heat stroke does, that is a diagnosis, and those cases get counted. But the large majority of heat deaths are not heat stroke. They are cardiovascular and renal events in people who already had cardiovascular and renal disease, where the heat was the stress that tipped an already strained system over, on the certificate that death is a heart attack, or kidney failure, or a stroke. So how do you count something that does not put its name on the paperwork? You use excess mortality. You take the number of deaths that occurred during and immediately after a heat episode, and you compare it to the number of deaths that would have been expected in that population, in that place at that time of year, based on the historical baseline. The gap is the excess. That method is not something invented to inflate heat numbers. It is the standard method for every diffuse mortality driver in public health. It is how influenza mortality is estimated. It is how pandemic mortality was estimated. It is how air pollution mortality is estimated. It has known limitations. It is sensitive to how you construct the baseline, and reasonable epidemiologists argue about the details. But here is the thing about the direction of the error, and it is the opposite of what the objection assumes. The research consistently finds that certificate-based counts undercount heat deaths substantially, precisely because they capture only the cases where a physician wrote heat on the form, which means the confirmed, official certificate-based number for any heat event is a floor, not a ceiling. The number you are being given is the conservative one. The third objection is the strongest one on this list, and I want to give it full credit before I bound it. It is the urban heat island. The argument goes, temperature records are set at weather stations. Weather stations are at airports and in cities. Cities have grown enormously around those stations over the last century, and cities are hotter than the countryside, so the records are measuring urban development, not climate. Every part of that is physically true. Urban heat islands are real, they are well measured, and they can be substantial. Several degrees Celsius of difference between a city centre and surrounding rural land is entirely ordinary. Asphalt and concrete have high heat capacity and low albedo. Buildings trap radiation between their walls. Vegetation and open soil, which cool through evapotranspiration, get replaced by surfaces that cannot. And here is what makes this objection especially relevant tonight rather than just generically true. The urban heat island effect is strongest at night. That is not a footnote, it is the central feature. During the day, the difference between a city and its surroundings is modest. At night, when the countryside is radiating efficiently to space, and the city is releasing stored heat out of its pavement and masonry, the gap opens up, urban heat islands are primarily a nighttime minimum temperature phenomenon, which is exactly the variable we have spent this entire video talking about. So the objection is not only physically correct, it is aimed at precisely the right number. Now let me bound it, carefully, with three things it cannot reach. It cannot reach a 597 decameter height field. That measurement comes from radio sondes, instrument packages carried aloft by balloons, twice a day, from sites around the world, sampling free atmosphere thousands of meters above any pavement. The height of the 500 millibar surface is a property of the whole air column. There is no parking lot at 18,000 feet. It cannot reach 850 millibar temperatures of 22 to 26 degrees Celsius. That is a mile above the ground, above the surface boundary layer entirely, in air that has never touched a city. And it cannot reach Death Valley National Park at 115 to 118 degrees. There is no city in Death Valley. There is no urban core, no heat island, no runway, no suburban sprawl that grew up around the station. Furnace Creek is a handful of buildings in a national park, so the honest conclusion is a split one, and I think it is more interesting than either side's version. The urban heat island is real, it is significant, and it is genuinely making overnight minima worse in every city currently under a warning. It is a legitimate part of why Phoenix is dangerous tonight, and it is not the source of the heat. The heat is in the air mass measured in free air, over places with no cities in them. The city makes it worse where the people are, which is precisely where it matters most. The fourth objection is that El Nino explains everything, so nothing unusual is happening. I have spent the last two sections arguing that El Nino explains a great deal, so let me be clear about what it does and does not do. An El Nino is a redistribution. It moves heat around inside the coupled ocean atmosphere system, out of the western Pacific warm pool into the surface of the central and eastern Pacific, and from there into the atmosphere and around the planet. That is what the phenomenon is. It is not a source of energy. It is a rearrangement of energy that is already in the system. So an El Nino is a strong explanation for geography and timing. Why this ridge, in this place, this summer, holding this long? That is a question El Nino can help with. What it cannot explain is the level the redistribution is happening around. It moves the heat. It does not decide the baseline it is moving the heat relative to. The fifth objection is that the forecasters know exactly what is coming and will not say. Of every claim on this list, this is the one the record contradicts most directly, because the counter-evidence is sitting in the public products. The Los Angeles and Oxnard office published, in a document any member of the public can read for free, the sentence, "The only real question for the Wednesday through Friday forecast is, will it be very hot or extremely hot?" Then it named which models disagreed. Then it described what each model was doing, a strong offshore push in one, a weaker gradient in the other. Then it stated what the consequence of each solution would be, and then it attached a numerical confidence figure 80% to a decision it had not yet made. The Fort Worth office published that its own heat headlines would need extending before it extended them. The Houston office published that its advisory would likely need extension through Wednesday. We made this same point in the video from August 12th about the derecho, and it is worth repeating because it generalizes. When forecasters do not know something, they say so, in the products, in plain language, with the disagreement described and the confidence quantified. The problem is that transparency of that kind reads, to a suspicious eye, exactly like evasion. An office saying we do not know whether it will be very hot or extremely hot sounds like hedging. It is actually the opposite. It is the office showing you its uncertainty rather than picking a number and pretending. Sixth, that fire containment numbers are being managed to make the season look controlled. I made half of this argument myself 20 minutes ago, so let me separate the two halves carefully. Containment percentage is genuinely misleading. It measures completed perimeter line, not extinguished fire, and the public reads it as a progress bar toward the fire being out. That gap between what it measures and what people think it measures is real, and it causes real confusion every single season. But misleading and falsified are completely different accusations. Look at Little Giant. 142,000 acres, 15% contained, 38 days after discovery, sitting at the top of a public national list where anyone can see it. If somebody were managing these numbers for appearances, that is the number they would manage. It is right there, it is embarrassing, and it is being reported accurately. The metric is confusing. The reporting is honest. Those are not the same problem, and conflating them means you stop being able to see the second-order thing that actually matters, which is that a 15% number on day 38 is telling you something true and unwelcome. Now let me give you the one variable in this story that is genuinely, measurably absent. Because absence is evidence too, and this one closes a door that gets opened every single time. Every time a weather event gets strange, a version of the same theory arrives. The sun is doing it. A solar storm, a coronal mass ejection, some change in the sun's output driving the atmosphere. So here is the space weather board today. The planetary K index, the standard measure of geomagnetic disturbance, running 0 to 9, peaked at 2.0 over the last 24 hours, and it is forecast to stay at or below 2 through August 25th. 2 is quiet. 2 is what the number does when nothing is happening. NOAA's 3 space weather scales all read 0, G0 for geomagnetic storms, S0 for solar radiation storms, R0 for radio blackouts. No storming of any kind on any scale. Solar wind speed is 436 kilometers per second, which is unremarkable. The interplanetary magnetic field strength is 4 nanotesla, which is weak, and its north-south component is at -1 nanotesla, which is a very slight southward tilt. Technically the orientation that lets solar wind energy couple into Earth's magnetosphere, but at -1 it does essentially nothing. Auroral hemispheric power is 19 gigawatts in the north and 20 in the south. Quiet. No mid-latitude visibility. X-ray flux from the sun is currently at B7.7, with a 24-hour peak of C4.2 and the most recent flare a C1.7. For scale, the classes go A, B, C, M, X, and each letter is a factor of 10. A C-class flare is a minor event. There has not been an M or an X in the last day. There is exactly one active region worth naming. Region 4513, sitting at 4 degrees north and 25 degrees east on the solar disk, with 24 spots and a beta-gamma magnetic configuration. It carries a 95% chance of C-class flares, 45% for M-class, 10% for X-class. It is the one thing on the sun with any potential, and it has not done anything yet. Proton flux above 10 mega-electron volts is at 3.9 particle flux units, below the threshold for even the weakest radiation storm category. Electron flux above 2 mega-electron volts is elevated past 1,000 units, which keeps a standing alert active, but the consequence of that is minor spacecraft charging risk and nothing else. There are no Earth-directed coronal mass ejections. The recent ones have all been directed west or northwest, off the Sun-Earth line entirely, and the solar cycle itself is in decline. The sunspot number for July came in at 78.1, down 47.8 from the same month a year earlier. That is a steep year-over-year drop, and it is exactly what you expect on the descending limb of a solar cycle past its maximum. Add all of that up and the conclusion is simple and worth saying out loud. Nothing is arriving from the sun. The most commonly proposed external driver for a weather anomaly is, today, measurably not present. The geomagnetic field is undisturbed, the radiation environment is normal, the flare activity is minimal, and the cycle is winding down. And the heat is happening anyway. That does not add a variable to the problem. It removes one, which when you're trying to work out why something is happening, is exactly as useful. So we have cleared the board. It is not engineered, because the energy is not available and the technology does not exist. The death tolls are not inflated, and if anything, they are flaws. The urban heat island is real, and is genuinely making the nights worse in the cities, and it cannot produce a height field or a Death Valley reading. El Nino explains the geography and not the baseline. The forecasters are publishing their uncertainty rather than concealing it. The containment numbers are confusing rather than falsified, and the sun is asleep. What is left is a much harder thing to sit with than any conspiracy, because a conspiracy at least implies somebody is in control of it. What is left is a ridge, doing exactly what ridges do, for longer than anything in the forecast can stop. Part 12. The floor, not the ceiling. Every heat wave you have ever seen covered was a number. It was the bank thermometer on the corner reading 111. It was the graphic with the sun on it. It was the reporter standing on asphalt cracking an egg on the hood of a car, and the question underneath all of it, the only question anybody ever asks, how hot did it get? That question has an answer this week, and it is a big one. 118 in Death Valley and along the lower Colorado River, 117 in the Coachella Valley, 116 in Phoenix, 113 in the Texas Rolling Plains, 109 across all of north and central Texas, heat index values to 113 in Oklahoma. Those are real numbers and they will hurt real people. But go back and look at what the officers actually wrote, because I want you to notice that almost none of them led with those. Las Vegas wrote about its lows. Tucson published an overnight range of 79 to 85 inside the hazard section of a warning. San Diego quantified the overnight anomaly 3 separate times in 3 separate products in one morning. And the Weather Prediction Center, in a forecast running to the 30th of August, wrote that record-breaking warm overnight temperatures across the southern tier will further limit recovery from the heat, especially given heatwave longevity. Read those together and the shape of this event becomes clear, and it is not the shape of a normal heat story. This ridge is not primarily raising the ceiling, it is raising the floor. Start with what that means for one person in one house tonight. A body under heat stress spends the day dilating vessels, raising heart rate, sweating out water and electrolytes, and running its kidneys hard to hold the balance together. All of that is survivable for a while, because at some point the sun goes down and the temperature falls and the body gets to stop. Core temperature drops, the cardiovascular load comes off, the debt gets paid. Take that away for one night, and most people are tired. Take it away for 3 and the vulnerable start arriving at emergency departments. Take it away for 8, which is what the forecast currently says, and you are running an experiment on a population using the only variable that has ever decided the outcome of a heat wave. Now widen it out from the body to everything else in the building. The air conditioner that has been holding that house at 78 degrees does not get its duty cycle break because the outdoor temperature it dumps heat into never comes down. The transformer on the pole outside, rated on the assumption that it sheds accumulated heat every night, does not shed it. The substation feeding the neighborhood peaks a little higher each afternoon because every building on the block started the day warmer than it did yesterday. And the hospital at the end of the road, whose admission rates track overnight minima more closely than they track afternoon maxima, watches its numbers climb. 4 systems: bodies, cooling equipment, the grid, and the hospitals. Every one of them designed around 8 hours of recovery a night. None of them designed around 8 days without it. Widen it again to the map. The Weather Prediction Center drew the region for August 26th through the 30th as the lower Mississippi Valley across the southern plains to the desert southwest. That is Louisiana and Arkansas and Oklahoma and Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and southern Nevada and inland California. It is somewhere in the region of 100 million people, and by Tuesday the ridge will also have pushed north far enough to put Cascade Valleys in Washington into the low 90s, widen it again to the ground. Because the failed night is happening on top of a country that has been drying for months. 29.87% of the country in severe drought or worse, 10.6% in extreme, 10 large fires still burning from July, 2 of them with most of their perimeter still open. The heavy fuels out there do not care what happened last night. They are keeping score by the season, and the season has been going the wrong way since spring. And widen it one last time, out past the continent entirely, to the water. There is a rectangle of the Pacific Ocean, 5,000 miles from Phoenix, that averaged 29.02 degrees Celsius over the last 3 months. That warm water moved the planet's largest convective heat engine several thousand miles east of where it normally sits. Moving the engine moved the waves it launches into the mid-latitudes, and one crest of one of those waves is the ridge that is currently standing over New Mexico refusing to progress, closing the sky over 8 states and taking the nights away from 100 million people. The nights in Tucson are being set by the temperature of the sea off Ecuador. That is not mysticism. That is a chain of 5 measured steps, and we walked every one of them. So here is where I have landed, and it is a change in what I look at. We have always measured heat waves by their peaks, because the peak is the number that fits on a graphic, and the peak is the number that breaks a record everyone recognizes. But what if the number that decides who lives through one is the one nobody photographs? Recorded at 4 in the morning, in the dark, when the thermometer is supposed to be falling, and this week it is not. Nothing has changed since the top of this video. There is still no cold front in the forecast. There is still no relief day. There is still no model showing an exit. The two products from the Weather Prediction Center still cover 8 days between them and still say continue. And the only real disagreement in the guidance is between a European model that produces near-record dangerous heat on the California coast and an American model that produces merely very hot. Let me be honest about the limits of all this, because I would rather you finish this video with a calibrated picture than a frightened one. These are forecasts. Forecasts fail. The pattern could break earlier than guidance suggests. Individual offices will revise their products all week, and some of these numbers will look wrong by Wednesday. The alert footprint today is roughly half of what it was in late July, which genuinely is a smaller event by that measure. And a heat wave that is forecast to be record-breaking does not always end up breaking records. But none of that changes the structural point, which is the thing I actually want you to take away. A heat wave does not have to break a record to kill people. It only has to outlast the systems that were built to survive it. And there is one number I am going to be watching this week, because it is the cleanest available check on whether this is getting worse or holding steady, and it updates in 48 hours. The Drought monitor releases every Thursday, with the data cut off on the Tuesday. The map we have been working from, all video covers the week ending August 18th, and it puts the country at 29.87% in severe drought or worse, a third of a percentage point below 30. The next release is the first one that will contain this heat wave. 30% is an arbitrary line. Nothing physical happens when a percentage crosses a round number, but it is a line that this country has been walking toward all summer, 1 or 2/10 of a point at a time, and the week that gets measured next is the week the night stopped working. So the question I am leaving open is not how hot it gets on Wednesday. It is what that map looks like when it comes back, and whether the number that has been creeping up all summer, a third of a point at a time, finally steps over.